Warning: MDMA and seizures. Up until the age of 22, I had done a number of drugs, so I was no stranger. I have been drinking alcohol since I was 16, smoked weed since I was 17, did Adderall once when I was 19, tripped on shrooms when I was 19, dropped acid once when I was 19, and snorted cocaine for the first time 6 months ago. Therefore, I had always wanted to roll on E, and I had decided that this would be my last hard drug to try. I also have no history of any medical problems except for being asthmatic. My best friend Corey and I decided that we would roll while I visited him at school. I had contacted my friend Alan, who also went to the same school, to provide the ecstasy since I knew he had rolled a couple times. I picked up the E, White Domino, and Corey, Alan, and my friend Stacy, who I was staying with, went to her house. We had also gotten a good number of water bottles, since we were afraid of dehydrating, since he had heard stories about people rolling at raves and dehydrating. Corey and I dropped the E at around 1 that Saturday afternoon. About a half an hour later, we began feeling the effects and were listening to music, while Alan and Stacy watched us. I was drinking lots of water through the period since I feared dehydrating. I remember I drank about 1.5 liters of water without peeing in a short amount of time. About 2 hours into the experience, I began feeling nauseous and ran to the bathroom. I ended up vomiting water and came back out and told my friends. I didn't feel well after that, so I sat down and passed out on the couch. The remainder of this experience I take from my friend's account. About 40 minutes after passing out, I began to shake on the couch, unconsciously. I was having a seizure. Alan put me on my side to make sure I didn't hurt myself, while Corey immediately called 911. Stacy cleared the way for the paramedics, who came within 4 minutes. I ended up having a second seizure at some point and stopped breathing. Over the next 12 hours, I was put in the pediatric intensive care unit, which is part of the hospital meant for patients with life-threatening illnesses. My parents were eventually contacted by my friends and drove up to the city I was in. The following day, I woke up at around 5 in the afternoon. That's 26 hours I had been unconscious in ICU. My friends came and visited me and were relieved to see me alive, along with my parents. The next 4 days I was in the hospital and moved out of the ICU that Monday in my own room in the regular unit, while the doctors treated my internal organs such as my kidneys and muscles, which had been affected by my seizures. I spent a number of days there because my kidneys were almost completely damaged during my seizure and my bloodstream was out of whack. I was hooked up to an IV fluid the entire time. I also had my blood pressure taken at least 4 times a day and blood drawn at least twice a day. Right now, I have been discharged from the hospital. I was actually discharged yesterday afternoon. I have done a lot of research on what happened to me, and it is indeed rare. A number of factors are the cause of what happened to me, such that I drank too much water in a small amount of time, and I am very small and female. I had disrupted my salt imbalance due to my water intake and the ecstasy which had caused my seizure. With additional research, I learned that 1 out of 5 people do actually die from what happened to me. I am forever thankful for my friends for their quick reactor skills that day, or I wouldn't be living today.
Most people report the Candyflip combination of LSD and MDMA to be a very enjoyable experience. The most rewardingly cosmic aspects of the LSD are combined with the empathogenic love of the MDMA to create a unique and often powerful experience. This is usually the case with me as well, provided I take a low dose of LSD with a regular dose of MDMA, i.e. too much LSD can blow the MDMA out of the water, which is a damn waste of MDMA. However, I feel obliged to report one very negative experience I had during a candy flip many years ago, when I was still living in Cedar Falls, Iowa. This report mainly serves to underscore the importance of set and setting, but also stands as a reminder that, as Alexander Shulgin says, there are no insignificant psychedelic experiences, meaning caution is always a great policy. I was hoping to do a rather deep exploration that night, and had invited my good friend H over to sit for me. His instructions were to sit quietly in the same room as me and intercede only if I really encountered problems. I felt this was a reasonable precaution, because this was only my second candy flip, and I was still at that time relatively inexperienced with both LSD and MDMA. I didn't expect trouble, as I was feeling good and confident about myself at the time, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to have H around, someone who knew me very well and could handle me if I got into a bad space. At the time, I was writing a book called Melody's Blues, and felt pretty involved with some of the characters, to the extent that my psychedelic trips often featured interactions with versions of these characters. I lay down on the floor under a nice blanket on top of some cushions, underneath a blindfold, and proceeded to go way, way out there, man, and suddenly found myself sharing a psychedelic bubble of space-time with Melody, the main character in the book. This was not in itself cause for alarm, but before long, things got incredibly dark and incredibly weird inside my head. The sensation was of being suddenly and vigorously pursued by vast collections of entities that were very specifically bent on doing us grievous harm. We fled through psychedelic corridors and churning maelstroms of energy, and the terror in me gradually increased over the course of what I'm guessing was half an hour, maybe more. The intensity continued to build, and it seemed extremely relentless. I could feel them shrieking as they chased us, these horrible alien monsters. I had never encountered such mayhem before, and was frightened beyond belief. At some point, it somehow finally occurred to me to rip the blindfold off and sit up. The room was just as I left it, if covered with a few more multicoloured swirls than usual. I immediately turned to H, who was staring intently at me. I said, "What the hell is going on?" He replied, "Well, you ingested LSD and MDMA, and you've been candy flipping for about an hour and a half or so." And then he fell silent, and suddenly I heard for the first time the sounds coming from the apartment next door. My neighbours had been having a horrendous, extremely loud fight, and the screams were clearly audible through the wall. These sounds had very obviously penetrated my trip, but I hadn't given any external signs that I was in trouble, so H had chosen not to intervene. The aggression from next door was as much a part of my set and setting as my preparation and intention, and had pretty much steered my trip into the darkest direction. We waited a long time, H and I, until the sounds finally died down. I was very shaken by my exposure to such violent energy, and wasn't sure how to proceed. Eventually I put on some incredibly soothing music and laid back down, and within minutes was sucked back into a very peaceful and magical place, about which I have written elsewhere.
It was New Year's Eve, and me and all my friends went to this supposed kick-ass party. When we got there, the first thing my boyfriend did was take some acid. That was the worst decision of my boyfriend's life. The guy he got it from had it in a breath mint bottle, and he squeezed about 10 drops, unexpectedly, on my boyfriend's tongue. About 10 minutes later, he was feeling pretty shitty. I was pissed because we hadn't found any ecstasy yet. I had previously had a great experience with ecstasy and was very excited to do it again. About an hour into my boyfriend's trip, he started to get really weird. He was rolling around on the floor and kept asking if trouble was a word. I wasn't too worried at this point because he had done the same thing last New Year's, but only with shrooms. I happened to look over and see a guy dealing some X. I immediately asked if he had any more, and I had bought one pill from him. I took the pill, it was a candy cane, and in about 20 minutes I started to feel the effects. I was talking to my friend T and some other girl that he had just met while my boyfriend was rolling around on the floor. I was feeling the normal effects from the pill. Then the DJ started to play some real hardcore shit. One of the things I remember him saying was, "It's the year 2002, so go kill yourself." That's not a good thing to hear when you've just started to roll. I started to feel like everyone that was walking toward me was going to yell at me, or that everyone was talking about me. At this point, I wanted to get away from this room. I wanted to go for a walk. I tried to get my boyfriend to stand, but he was really tripping hardcore. He ended up falling on the floor and drooling. He even hit me at one point. He really wanted to get away from me. This one girl kept asking if he was okay, and I kept saying yes. Her boyfriend went to get us some water. In the meantime, I started to puke. My boyfriend left me and wandered into the crowd. I got the water from this girl's boyfriend, and she offered to help me find my friends. We walk around a little, and I finally found T. He helped me find my boyfriend. I finally found him sitting alone with his head down. I still don't know to this day what he did in that half an hour that we couldn't find him. I sat down next to my boyfriend, and that's when things really started to get bad for me. My boyfriend kept saying my name, and I kept asking, "What?" but he wouldn't answer. I didn't want to talk to anyone, but yet I still wanted my friends by me. Occasionally, I would see one of my friends walk by, and I would look at them, but I couldn't get myself to smile. I kept wanting to close my eyes, but then again, I felt totally awake. I wanted to cry, but I wanted to laugh. And then a thought came over me that had never come over me before. I wanted to die. It was the most scariest feelings ever. I never want to feel like that again. I kept thinking that I was in the lowest place before death. The feeling was so horrible, it is unexplainable. I felt like that for about 2 hours. I kept having to drink water too. I felt like if I didn't drink water, I would puke again, or die. Finally, my boyfriend came out of his trip and was normal again. We walked around and saw our other friends J and P. J was rolling for his first time, and he looked horrible. He didn't have anything to chew on, and he desperately needed water. That made me feel even worse. We got away from them, and I started to feel better, almost totally better, until my boyfriend started to yell at me because he wanted ecstasy. By this time, it was 3 o'clock, so everyone was dry. He left me sitting on the floor, and I felt like I was going to cry. I also felt like I was going to die because I was around all the evil people that were going to yell at me. The outcome of this party was my boyfriend never found any X, and we couldn't get our car started. P finally got it started because he had this magical feeling from the acid he had previously took. He did get it, started it on his first try, and we were off on our 4-hour drive back home. I kept having the feeling that I couldn't live without water the whole ride home, and I kept feeling sick, and I still had the feeling that I was going to die. We finally made it home, and I went to my boyfriend's house because I also kept feeling that if I wasn't with him, I would die. When we arrived at his house, he started to cry. I had never seen him cry before, and we had been together for a year and a half. I started to cry with him, and we let all our fears and troubles out. I eventually went home that night, but the next 9 months were horrible. I know this story is long and it drags on and probably doesn't make much sense, but the moral of it is, respect the drug you are taking and don't take it for granted like I did. I thought that ecstasy was the greatest drug ever and it would never make me have a bad trip. Boy, was I wrong. Also, if someone you love and care about is having a bad trip, chances are, if you take a hallucinogen, you will have a bad trip also. At least, that's what I learned from the whole experience. As for the next 9 months, I felt that I needed water or else I would get physically sick, and I occasionally felt the urge to commit suicide. I had never in my life ever thought about suicide before that night, but I thought about it after that experience. It's been 2 years since then, and I don't need water anymore. I know that probably sounds really weird. I never feel the urge to commit suicide anymore, and me and my boyfriend have sworn off acid forever. I did ecstasy with my boyfriend after that night, but only once, and I was very afraid. This time I made sure that I respected it, and I wasn't with someone that made me uncomfortable or scared. I hope that at least one person learns something from this, or can relate to how I felt.
I am 17 years old and I had been looking forward to my next MDMA experience, having had very positive results in the past 6 or 7 sessions, but this was to be one that was completely different. I've been feeling good these past few days, although feeling a bit of fatigue due to regular marijuana use, which I have cut down in order to achieve better results in school, seeing as to how I have noticed a decline in school performance once I began to heavily use marijuana. I have also been using Zopiclone or Imovane that I had procured from my mother, fairly regularly as well, which could attribute to my spacey feelings throughout the week. My friend, who I will call M, had acquired a nice sum of Blue Dolphin MDMA pills, which I was assured was of good quality. Having been able to coherently adapt to any occasion under the influence of MDMA, I figured I would step it up a notch. Last Thursday during school, I decided that I would drop about half a pill to get a feel for it. I took it around 1:30 p.m. Wanting the onset to be quicker, I decided to take the other half approximately 20 minutes later. Still not feeling it, and for reasons I still don't understand, I took another full pill around 2:10. Soon enough, it hit me. The best feeling I've ever had. Just talking with my friends and people I didn't know. It was all so intimate. The body feeling overwhelmed me and the feelings of love completely consumed me. I never wanted to leave it. The peak ended around 5 o'clock with a pretty subtle come down. Still feeling the amphetamine type feelings and wanting to get back to where I was, I decided to take my last 3 Zopiclone pills, 5 milligrams each, hoping that it would somehow bring back those feelings. I took the 3 around 6:30 to 7 o'clock. I'm not quite sure what the time was. I was told to take out the garbage around 8 o'clock when I noticed that something was wrong. I saw shadows of what looked like people inside my family's minivan. I peered inside to see that there were several people there, motionless, all looking at me. Some were female and some were male. I couldn't quite distinguish them. Their faces seemed to be in a state of constant change, shifting and moving around. I began to bang on the windows, telling them to get out. That's when my dad came out. "What's going on?" my dad yelled. I explained to him that there were several people inside our minivan. He looked perplexed. He told me that there were no people inside, so I rushed back in. In the shadows of our darkened family room, those same people were hiding behind the plants and curtains. I screamed. My dad took me aside and looked at me right in the eyes. My pupils were enormous, and he knew that I had taken something. Soon enough, he had told my mother, and she became very worried. She decided to keep a watchful eye on me during the rest of the ordeal, which turned out to be the most mind-bending experience of my life. As I laid on my bed, I noticed the light switch began to slip down the wall. That's odd, I thought, and soon enough little horizontal lines began to come across the wall as well. When I moved my hand towards the wall, the lines began to cover my hand, orbiting them. Fascinating, I thought to myself, as I guided my fingers towards my desk roughly 7 feet in front of me, and lo and behold, the lines seemed to fly towards that area. My lava lamp also began to shift from a red to an orange colour, almost rhythmically. Almost simultaneously, what seemed to look like spiders began to crawl down the walls and from the ground onto my bed. I moved my hands over these spiders and they vanished into a dust-like vapour. The realism was truly astonishing. By this point, the perceptual effects of this combination of drugs began to increase. I noticed a gnome-type creature, approximately 1.5 inches in height, attempting to remove the doorstep with a wrench-type tool. I also saw what looked like 2 reddish robots beginning to combat each other on my desk, with what appeared to be reinforcements crawling up my desk chair. Things began to be very strange at this point. I estimate it was around 1 AM to 1:30 when the hallucinations became even more vivid. The headstock on my guitar seemed to waver back and forth, and also seemed to drip onto the carpet. As I approached the instrument, the tuning keys began to move. And not only did they move, they began to spin at an alarming rate, and soon enough the strings seemed to fly off the fretboard. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, and it returned to normal. It seemed that the visual distortions intensified as I unfocused my eyes, which allowed me to see what really wasn't there. I experimented with this technique throughout the night, seeing much more cartooning of normal objects. And what seemed even more fascinating was the clothes in my closet. I noticed someone in that sweatshirt, almost wanting me to come closer. I walked closer and it seemed that several people were inside those shirts. It's difficult to explain what they looked like, although it was similar to those I saw in my minivan. Constantly changing faces. Many eyes as well. I told them my name and pointed towards myself. "Danny," I said. No response. It seemed that they acknowledged my presence but decided not to respond. This continued for about 2 to 2.5 hours until I passed out, presumably. The next day I woke up after only 2 hours of actual sleep, and I noticed that my sweaters seemed to form mouths and eyes in the folds of the fabric and began to converse with one another. I also began to see a waterfall effect on my walls. I knew something wasn't right. So after a few hours at the doctor's, blood samples and being hooked up to heart monitoring cables and antipsychotic pills, I am now finally at home. It's Saturday night and the images are still vivid in my mind. How could these 2 drugs produce such profound visual effects? I don't know what went on, and I don't plan on ever repeating such a combination. I'm sure under different circumstances it could have been better, but for the sake of health and sanity.
Last night, I went to a rave in DC by myself since none of my friends would join me. I went to hear good techno and house music and chill out. I'm 20, not 21, yet they slapped me with a serve alcohol bracelet. I was feeling nice from the beers when a shady dude asked if I needed anything. I was bored, so I bought 2 pills from him. This was 11 p.m. An hour later, I was very disappointed. The only perceivable effect from the 2 pills were slight disassociation, but no increase in energy and actually less motivation to dance. I knew I had eaten duds. I ran into another dude who claimed to have some good stuff. At midnight, I bought one and immediately felt amped. And soon, I was feeling one with the music, the lights, and the dance floor. I was feeling so good, I bought 2 more from him, making a total of 3 good pills by 12:30. This was my first time trying ecstasy. The rest of the night blended away in a blur of excellent dancing, but I incurred memory loss and blacking out and passing out. I don't remember getting my coat on the way out, but I managed somehow. Then began the living nightmare. My memories are only vague dreams. I ran into 4 guys who were concerned for me because I think they nearly hit me in their car. I was doing poorly on my own, so I got in the car with them. I didn't know what I was doing. I began wigging out and speaking insane paranoid ramblings like a madman. I was utterly drenched in sweat and I was shaking. I felt utter emotional torment, as if hell itself was attacking me, and I was totally helpless. I thought I was losing my mind. My sweating and state of mind only got worse, and I'm sure I was burning up. I talked with the guys in some kind of lobby with sirens in the background and many concerned-looking people. They kept pouring water on my head and face. This was around 5 a.m. I woke up at 11 a.m. in an ER bed with a catheter, water sugar IV, frequent blood pressure monitoring, and a heart rate monitor. My lips were chewed to hell. Apparently, hypoglycemia was on the docket as well, so I'm getting that followed up on. The docket also reported weakness and numbness on one side of my body and passing out. I don't know what the problem was. High first dose, fake drugs, interactions, allergy, or just the hypoglycemia. I have not found myself to be especially sensitive to any drugs in the past, but it was psychologically the most brutal night of my life. Not counting my wanderings in DC at 4 a.m. that only fortunately got me picked up by the right people. I'm thankful that I didn't find my car in that state of mind. Today, the day after, I felt slightly disassociated, tired, achy, and stiff, but none of the numbness and weakness on one side. I hope my mind will heal itself from the trauma it underwent last night. I unwittingly put my life completely in fate's hands, in more ways than one, if ecstasy was even what I consumed.
My sister and I are not regular users, but we like to take ecstasy and MDMA occasionally if attending a big gig. We went to Daft Punk this summer of '06 and made efforts to source some of either of the above for the big event. However, there was a shortage of traditional pills and MDMA powder, and our supplier gave us MDMA, which was in crystal rock form. It was broken up, a dusty pale brown colour. Some of the pieces were quite big. It had the distinctive taste of MDMA, which reassured us as we had not seen it like that before. On the night, we didn't take any until we got to the concert. We started taking it at about 8-10 p.m, with a view to being high for DP at 9ish. Our initial attempts were awkward, as it was difficult to get many of the crystals on our fingers. We eventually managed to consume about 1/4 of a gram each over a period of about 20 minutes. We experienced an amazing high and the concert was great. I won't describe it in detail as it seemed at the time fairly standard. Feeling great, lots of dancing, etc. It is not really the point of this narrative, however. Afterwards, we went into town and at about 11:30 p.m. took the rest of the MDMA, another 1/4 gram or so each. I should mention that my sister is a good deal lighter than I am, at about 8 stone, and she did not experience the side effects that I did. I am also older at 32 to her 27. I first noticed the hallucinations, though I did not realise that is what they were at the time, at about 1 a.m. I was alone, feeling generally good. I had come down from the peak and was tired. I was waiting for my sister to come back from the ladies. There were pictures being shown on the big screen in the club, and I was watching those while leaning against a wall. I suddenly noticed a pipe of some kind on the ceiling, and what I thought was a spinning wheel on the pipe, which I thought was flashing the pictures on the screen. I wasn't disturbed, as I'd had a rational explanation for what I saw. I'm a type that likes to know how things work. When my sister returned, I went to show it to her, but it was gone. There was clearly nothing there but a pipe. I was puzzled, but not unduly concerned. As the night went on, I became increasingly aware that I was somehow out of kilter with my surroundings. I should mention that I did not realise for a long time what was actually happening. I've never taken acid, as the thought of hallucinations does not appeal to me at all. From other people, I thought hallucinations were kind of cartoonish and surreal. What I was experiencing was not like that, but looked absolutely real. I was slow to tell my sister, as I did not want her to think I was not coping. However, I was getting more and more uneasy and puzzled. I was increasingly afraid I was going to have a panic attack at this point. Then it gradually got worse. We were in territory that is very familiar to us. However, as we were going home, hazy on the time now, think it was about 2:30 as the club was not over, we went round a corner and very near my workplace, which I am completely familiar with, I had to do a double take. There was a booth, lit up and glowing blue in the middle of the traffic intersection, which was an elaborate ATM. I'd never seen it before. I exclaimed loudly and pointed it out to my sister. She was, of course, baffled. I looked again and it was gone. I still did not say to her what was happening. However, on the journey home in the taxi, it was becoming apparent to her as I constantly questioned where we were and was difficult to reassure. When we got home, she took off her shoes, and I saw that underneath her Converse boots, she had even more elaborate Converse boots in a herringbone pattern, blue and red. Of course, I asked her where she got them. It was at that point that we realised I was actually seeing things. Once I knew that was what was going on, it became a little easier to cope. The hallucinations were very real though. They didn't go away when I looked closer at them, but seemed to grow only more real. They usually disappeared if I looked away. They were also quite organic. My sister has freckles, and as we talked they would get darker and darker until it looked like her face was heavily stained with ink spots. Her hair, head and nose also kept changing shape as I talked to her. At one point she even had glasses on. Then at another point there was also a man sitting in the room with us. He was threatening, just very real. My sister stayed up with me as I tried to sit it out. I was difficult to talk to as I kept losing track of the conversation, what with watching for the hallucinations and looking at them. I was edgy and twitchy. I thought if I was alert enough they would stop, but it nearly always took me a few seconds to realise each new hallucination was just that, a hallucination. It was a very tiring process. Eventually they seemed to subside. They got smaller and less frequent. The realistic people and items were gone and replaced by a small red haze. It looked like a haze of red blood droplets. It was around this point that we went to bed, and it was about 4:30 a.m. The major hallucinations were gone the next day. However, I have experienced afterwards an uncertainty about what I see. I have occasionally seen something that is not there. I'm not sure if this is a residue of the drug or simply me now being aware that my eyes are not always reliable and that there are other possibilities for shapes that I see every day. Even so, it is very disconcerting. I last experienced such a moment about 3 weeks ago when I saw a boy who had a green hat on, a maroon t-shirt, and a green long-sleeve t-shirt underneath, and I thought I was seeing the Incredible Hulk. These moments are very fleeting, but they make me uneasy and I tend to worry over them in my mind. My sister and I are very careful with our drug use, and are not really part of a big group with whom we can discuss my experience. I just hope this experience informs others. I am glad it does not appear to be long-lasting.
I wrote this report mainly to get it off my chest, because it is a day that I cannot even bring up or even try to think about. So I hope by writing this report, it will help get rid of some of the anxiety left behind from this day. I am 19 years old and was just about out of high school. Summer was just around the corner, and the roles were available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I consider myself to be very experienced with the drug, having at the time done it about 40-50 times, almost all on relatively high doses. I also had a tight group of about 5 or 6 friends who I used to and continue to still roll with. For the amount of times I had rolled, I had experienced the cleanest, finest rolls, to the dirtiest rolls cut with who knows what. Though at the time, our very good friend was consistently getting very clean, legitimate rolls for somewhat of a long period at this time. I trusted him, and I still do. Now to the day I will never forget. It started off, we were at my friend Nate's house, a place we always go and feel very comfortable. Several of us decided this is where we were going to start taking our rolls before going out to a big house party later that night. There were about 8 of us all together, though only 4 of us planned to roll. It was me, Alex, Ben, and my friend Matt. Alex and Ben being very experienced just like myself, while Matt was a newcomer to this drug, though I really talked him into doing it because I thought I could give him some of the spiritual enlightenment that it had given myself. Matt was a great friend, though at times did not have much self-control. He was an all-state wrestler who got kicked off the team for punching a ref in the face, and he would fight just about anyone for anything you could think of. He was also going through depression over his girlfriend. I really thought that taking this drug would really help open his eyes to a lot of things. Boy, was I wrong. At around 6 o'clock, the 4 of us took our first dose. I took 2 of white roses. Like I said, there was about 8 people there, including the 4 rollers. Being in an apartment, there were about 4 of us inside and 4 of us outside. I began to feel my roll about 30 minutes into it, and was really looking forward to it because the coming up was feeling really clean and smooth. I was playing video games inside with Matt, who I could tell was starting to feel the coming on effects. I was just talking to him, and from what I could tell, he felt slightly uncomfortable, but from the way the rest of us were feeling, I figured there was nothing to worry about, and I was starting to feel great. Another half hour passes, it's about 7 o'clock, and I step outside with Alex and Ben, and we all just look at each other saying how great the E was, and we began to smoke a cigarette. At that point, it seemed like the night was starting to kick off, and everything was gonna be great. All of a sudden, Matt walks outside with tears in his eyes. Like I said before, Matt is the type of kid who is always proving how tough he is, and always fighting. He would never show us tears. I look at Matt and say, "Matt, what's wrong, man?" He is bawling his eyes out, and we sit him down and ask him what's wrong. He doesn't waste any time, and he says, "I gotta tell you guys something. You're gonna look at me so much differently." In my head, I'm like, I don't even want to know, because I knew it was going to be bad. When Matt was 13 years old, he had done time in a youth detention center and lived his young age in a cell. I tried to keep what he was about to say back because I knew from the looks of things that it was not the time. I really wanted to talk to him, and he just let it all out, explaining to us that when he was 13 in placement, he had been raped by a staff member at the center he was at. And that's the reason he fights as much as he can, because he feels that is the only way he feels like he can get back into his manhood. Wow. Those words hit me at 100 miles per hour. This is a 19-year-old kid who I really liked and respected, even after he told me this. I did not think any differently of him. If anything, I respected him more. After realizing what he had just said, it hit Matt extremely hard. He was crying harder than ever, begging us to beat the shit out of him because he didn't feel like a man. Now this is one of my best friends telling me this. It really fucking hurt me to hear this. The people inside took notice to what was going on outside. My friend Nate asked us to take a walk. He could tell something was wrong and told us to come back and try and get him to calm down. We began the walk. This is in the city, in somewhat of a rough area. Me, Matt, Alex, and Ben. Alex and Ben were handling this situation very well at the time, and I was as well. We talked to Matt, trying to calm him down, and he at one point was really starting to cool down and realize we were his friends, even after telling us this. Then the E must have been hitting him at full force, because he would, in the blink of an eye, go from almost accepting what he had told us, back to complete anger and pain. He started punching himself in the face very hard. And even at one point, trying to jump in front of a car to take his life. Going back and forth from accepting things to anger would not stop. 1 second, we would think he was snapping back into it, but then he would go right back to the craziness. He had another roll in his pocket, and we knew we could not let him take the second. He was too emotionally wrecked at this point and was already starting to lose it completely. Alex tried to talk Matt into giving him the roll. This is when Matt got extremely hostile, wanting to fight. This is when I tried explaining to him why I gave him a roll in the first place, to try and help him realize things and that the fighting is out of control, and how he was just about to fight his friend. He continued to cry and apologized, and he promised he wasn't going to take the roll. He was just going to hold on to it. We agreed knowing that he was going to try and take it, but to just try and let him calm down before we have to hold him down. Our walk was finished and nothing was really accomplished. The other 4 kids at the apartment were all outside. At one point, the ice cream truck went by, causing Matt to run around like a little kid with complete joy. The other 4 laughed at him, not realizing the situation completely. They said to us that they wanted to head to the party already. I talked to Nate, telling him Matt wasn't ready, and asked if we could stay there with him and head there later on. He agreed. Ben left us at this point with the other guys, and it was now me, Alex, and Matt at our friend Nate's apartment. We all sat down, and Matt was starting to act even more and more out of tune. Though not crying anymore, or not feelings of pain, just not knowing anything that was going on. I asked him about his other role, and he gave me the bad news. He ate it on his walk. I looked at Austin, knowing it was going to get worse. Within 15 minutes, Matt's legs started shaking uncontrollably, and one of his eyes was about swollen shut from hitting himself so damn hard. Both of his legs were violently shaking, and his eyes were beginning to roll in the back of his head. We both sat there trying to keep him concentrated and not let something terrible happen. We had all taken 2 of these rolls, and me, Ben, and Alex had been fine. But Matt was completely starting to have a serious problem. He was chewing with his mouth like he was chewing on gum, and we heard him crack one of his teeth from chewing on nothing so hard. I would grab him and try and talk to him, but it would not help. I would try to give him water, and it would all just come down his mouth, and the violent shaking would not stop. He asked me if I was his dad and why I left him and his mom. He began talking to us like we were other people in his life that had somehow hurt him in one way or another. He talked to me like I was his girlfriend, violently shaking with his eyes rolling in the back of his head, telling me he loved me. I could not believe what was happening. After about 25 minutes of shaking, he slowly started to stop and could at some points hold a conversation. It is about 8 o'clock now, and me and Alex knew we had to wait it out until the E really began to start wearing off before we were about to bring Matt anywhere. Matt was really feeling upset at some points when he realized the situation. We would explain to him that he can take control of what is happening and that everything is going to be all right. And once again, he would go from almost feeling the way he should be, right back to the pain and anger, wishing he was dead. At about 8:30, during another point of almost being normal, he said he was ready to try to get up. I thought he was back. We stood him up. He took one look at the light in the room while standing up and fell to the ground, babbling on about me being his dad, asking if I loved him and his mom. The babbling, the crying, the feelings of happiness, they were all mushed together, and he was experiencing so many feelings all at once. It was way too much to handle. At about 9:30, he had realized where he was and what he had been doing. The E at this point made him pretty happy, but he was still a little oblivious. Me and Alex at this point were just very frustrated and were not on the same page as him as far as the happiness. He told us we were his best friends and he loved us, and then continued to tell us a couple more things about himself that I really didn't want to know. It was nothing like the first thing he had said though. So after about 4 hours of craziness, complete craziness, I decided not to go to the party and just to get dropped off at home. Matt told me he loved me when I left. I went home feeling really upset about the whole thing. Matt was without a doubt going to be looked at differently, and I knew that Alex or Ben was going to tell at least someone and people would find out. Matt was an extremely tough kid who did know how to work very hard, lifting, training, etc., and really never took shit from anyone, though he just took it to another level quite often. Matt called me at about 11 o'clock the next night, telling me he took 3 rolls and was begging me to still be his friend. I yelled at him for taking the rolls and said I was still his friend and to never take those again. The next day in school, I saw Matt, and once again, he had taken the rolls that morning at school. Talking to him at school that day was like talking to a zombie. He was emotionally drained, and he was not the same person I knew and respected. After these 3 days, Matt was never the same again, or even close to the same. He began to abuse ecstasy on a very regular basis, and within 3 weeks of that day, he was completely gone. A kid who was on his way to the Air Force, an extremely hard worker, and just all in all, a damn good friend, was now a ghost. He started breaking into people's houses and would steal from people who try to continue being his friend. I saw Matt about 2 months after the day. I had seen him since then. It had just been about a month since I had seen him. I had tried to help him greatly. I had just reached a breaking point and knew he was gone. So after about a month of not seeing him, I saw him at a local spot. There were 2 gangsters around him, with a lot of people we knew watching. Matt had robbed one of the gangsters, and right as I showed up, it was about to go down. When Matt was the Matt I knew, there was almost no doubt in my mind he would have flattened both of them at the same time, with a lot of ease. But the new Matt was terrified, almost in tears, begging for them not to hurt him. Me and my friends talked to the gangsters, and they left. I did not see Matt after this day because he later got put in jail for breaking into houses. This day proved to me how extremely powerful ecstasy really is. Like I said prior to this, I had taken a lot of X, about 45 different times, and I had taken 5 to 6 rolls on many different nights with almost no side effects. I am a bodybuilder and a football player accepted to college, and never felt lasting effects of rolls. But after that day, I did, and I continue to. All it takes is hearing the song One Blood, because it was on while Matt was shaking uncontrollably. Just simple things reminding me of Matt bring me back to that day and giving me a feeling that I cannot explain, like I'm rolling, and having all these feelings hit me very hard, almost like a train at times. Luckily though, this has gotten better due to the fact that this was about 6 months ago.